something simple that people don't consider is the amount you save on overheads, right? So, for instance, your in-house agency sits in the same building as your client team, right? So, whereas if you hire an external agency, part of that agency fee or retainer cost is paying for the rent of the actual building, for example, or the overheads of maintaining the building. So that already, you eliminate that. Then also efficiencies, right? Because now the access level that you have to the people to do the work is not on the same level. So there isn't that strictness of, oh, okay, cool, I'm paying for 15 hours a month of this designer for a creative agency. But once you do in-house, it's like it's open gates. Yeah, it's complete open gates. It's like you work until the job is done, until I'm satisfied, right?
Sanbonani, dumelang abusheni. Hello, goeiemorgen. Yes, indeed, you tuned into another episode of the Digital Dyans Season 2. And as usual, I'm joined by
Sanele and
Siya, shoutouts.
Shoutouts to our family who's already online. Please don't forget to listen and subscribe, to follow on our social networks. We are on Twitter, we are on Instagram and the Facebook. Hey, we've also got a LinkedIn account, so we are also trying to maneuver towards professional discussions, because I'm sure some of you do benefit from those insights. And if you are an easy listener and you'd like to listen in on your way on the road or wherever you are in your offices, you can also check out our podcasts. We are available on iTunes, Spotify, and of course, what's the third one again?
Is it Buzzspreezy?
Buzzspreezy.
Buzzspreezy.
No, you can't type in Buzzspreezy into the URL. It's not gonna come
out. We are on Buzzsprouts, Digital Dyans. Check us out there. I like that because it integrates all of our various networks. And also shout out to our overseas audience. And we'd like to hear more from you commenting. And this show is made up by the people who listen to it. We're trying to grow this knowledge network. And of course, a few things have come up in terms of what we've seen with regards to a lot of nostalgia marketing. We'll get into that. But our topic today is the discussion between internal versus external when it comes to ad agencies. I think we've had various experiences when it comes to that.
Yeah. So I think I saw people sort of bringing this topic up recently on the timeline. I think I was having a chat back and forth with Karen Williams about it actually, and it's a topic that's started to sort of like rear its head just in the recent past, especially when you look at some of the sort of big established brands, your big FMCG brands that have decided to have in-house agencies. And I think my first experience of it was on Nestle. So I worked in the external agency, but then there was that shifting of the tide where they realized actually when they started looking back at like our retainer, they're looking at kind of the services we offered, and they were like, oh, by the way, so we're starting to build an in-house agency. And then obviously now when you're having that conversation with your external agency will be like, okay. So obviously you're trying to, take the business away from us.
They're trying to initiate the service level agreement.
Yeah, exactly. So that happened with Nestle, and it started small because what they did is that they brought in a design studio so to do all their creative work. And then they're like, actually, let's just build from this and just create the entire model itself. The same thing with Unilever. So there's a design studio called U Studio. So that was probably like 2-3 years in the making, whereby they actually decided again to also have that design studio element first to pump out all their creative, and then eventually built an entire agency in-house at Unilever. And I think there's pros and cons to both. I think from a brand perspective, you look at, something simple that people don't consider is the amount you save on overheads, right? So for instance, your in-house agency sits in the same building as your client team, right? So whereas if you hire an external agency, part of that agency fee or retainer cost is paying for the rent of the actual building, for example, or the overheads of maintaining the building. So that already, you eliminate that. Then also efficiencies, right? Because now the access level that you have to the people to do the work is not on the same level. So there isn't that strictness of, oh, okay, cool, I'm paying for 15 hours a month of this designer for a creative agency. But once you do in-house, it's like it's
Open
open
gates.
gates. Yeah, it's complete open gates. It's
Mm.
like you work until the job is done, until I'm
Very true.
satisfied, right?
And also maybe there's a level of, just what you're talking about, job satisfaction. Do you think people are much more committed when they are designated to accounts, so that they see their work and they have sort of ownership to the work?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a big thing, especially for corporates, is wanting sort of the people that work on the accounts to feel accountability and ownership to their brands. They want you, the brand managers and marketing managers want you to care about their brand as much as they do. And that also, in terms of what you're saying, is understanding that, okay, we're putting you on this brand, so you build, you grow with it, you understand its nuances and stuff. Exactly. So yeah, and I think I guess the only one thing I'd say, which I've noticed is possibly a slight negative, is once you have sort of your in-house agency, what tends to happen is that the level of creativity suffers slightly because you're not being stretched as much in terms of finding those groundbreaking, like, creative ideas, etc., than you'd have in an external agency, because you're basically taught to think like the client in the in-house in terms of when you get onboarded.
So there's a level of complacency that maybe settles in, maybe?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much complacency. It's more about...
It's also fatigue as well. I mean, looking at the same thing, I like diversifying. If you're stuck like with one thing and you get a chance and you take a look at it later, sometimes, and a lot of the time, you might learn a certain element from another campaign which can teach you something about the one that you're working on.
Yeah, so for me, it's mostly about how you get onboarded into the company, right? So you come into Nestle, you are a Nestle employee, but you work in the agency of Nestle. But they bring you up on everything that has made Nestle, right? So that part of, it's almost like ingraining you into the way that place thinks. And sometimes when you're too close to it, the creativity, you get 100%. You get institutionalized in the way that brand has operated for like 100 years or whatever, into their legacy. And now that when you go into creating work for them, you're thinking in that manner. Whereas if you come from an external agency, you don't have that relationship to it. So you look at the creative more objectively and you're able to find better creative ideas.
So when it comes to the numbers, I'm going to tap into you, Manyisa.
Yeah.
Is there a way to make it work? Obviously, I think there is. If you don't know, for example, the scorecards, the retainer itself, and how much you're paying and all that kind of thing, from both sides, if you don't know how to establish the SLA, as you mentioned earlier, the relationship, you may find you're doing too much work for too little money, or vice versa. A client may find that actually, I don't know what I'm paying for.
So, great question. The thing is, I've noticed gradually over maybe the last 5 years that there has been a gradual movement towards this in-house agency model, and I think it's in this first few iterations and trying to figure out exactly how is the best way to go about it. One of the few things that I think is probably quite beneficial is with those degrees of separation from client to the person that is working in-house. There's a lot less than in an agency. So in terms and I mean, I'm very tired of this word that it gets thrown around in advertising. It's agile. Because things are not really as agile because there's so many approval processes, bureaucracy, red tape that you have to go through. But in-house, I believe that there's a lot quicker way to make those turnarounds quicker.
I want to talk about that. Sorry to take you back. So how do you differentiate between streamlining and agility, so that we just know how those processes, where we could put them?
When I hear streamlining, I'm thinking retrenchments.
That's
cutting the fat.
Cut the fat. But also similarly,
redundant processes
with external agencies, when they bill clients, they're giving for anyone, let's say for an art director, might be a 500 Rand per hour rate or something, but when they charge client, it's it's 850 or something like that. This is money that you could just be making just being on client side. So there's pros and cons to the whole thing, but I think it works differently for different verticals. I don't think all verticals can be easily in-house agencies. I don't know, automobile brands. I don't know.
How do you decide which service to keep in-house and which one? Because obviously there's a certain extent of understanding. I think for me, as an agency, you have to understand that they will move towards in-house.
Yeah.
Would it be more sustainable to say, listen, we're going to prepare you for that and then sell a secondary service instead of just waiting and billing them each month and hoping for the best? Because you do get to a moment where you've scaled the client enough and certain services they feel that they can do themselves, or they've got the procedures. And some organizations are even smart enough to say, we want the procedures. Please, can you show us the procedures and what it looks like so we can actually standardize the So how do you plan from both sides to say, okay, the relationship will come to an end? Which services can we capacitate ourselves over a certain period of time to hand over, and how?
Yeah, so I think you have to look at, in terms of the different agencies that you have within the marketing sphere, and look at the specialities, right? So you'll say a PR agency, that's a specialized agency. And above the line, like TV ad agency is a specialist agency. Then you have your digital agency, for example. And then you even have like a sponsorship agency, for example, right? So,
and even a below the line agency.
So you look at all those things and then you find, okay, cool, which are the ones that I have to have a specialist skill and actually pay for that outside of the in-house agency, and make sure that, that is sorted on its side, and that, I can rather in-house the digital agency and not expect the digital agency to also be the PR agency, to also be the sponsorship agency, and make sure that they are very specific in terms of that's what you want from them. Because and I've seen this model also at this point in time, is that a lot of the brands are struggling to be confident to completely pull away from the external agencies. So you find like this combination of like a bit in-house hybrid model, and that's just because, as I said earlier, there are pros and cons to the in-house agency and the external. So it's almost like they're still trying to find that balance in terms of which sort of setup works the best for them. And also, when you're talking about the processes now, and also what Siya was saying about agility, is that, that assumption about the agility thing is it gets used to beat. It's like the stick that they use to beat you, because they go, okay, because you're in-house, right, that means you're supposed to be more agile than the external agency, because first you're in my building, so if you need approval, you don't have to send an email, just walk upstairs, just walk upstairs, tap me on the shoulder, and be like, that's the content plan, and now because of that, they prefer to not have those processes that streamline a brief, like when it goes in. So they're like, no, man, I'm fucking brief. I can't need man fit must tear to man fit,
like, a little added value here.
You know what I'm saying? So leaving that thing open ended allows them to abuse the system completely. And then the creatives that work on that feel like, okay, highball funding, like, how are you just gonna give me? They call these things like water cooler briefs. So you go chill, water cooler, and it's like, so Wasanga, man, I just need you to do this, and then it's just this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing.
In the next hour,
the water cooler briefs are so informal, but the report, it
needs to be on point, dude.
So how do we have that kind of distortion? Because I'm process driven. It's input, process, output. How are you gonna expect a water cooler process to have a Lurie Award winning outputs?
I think that's also like I think that's also a risk that you run by being in-house, because let's say you do get to a water cooler and it is actually clients that is there standing and you're there, and client knows exactly what you do. So it's like, yo, Siya, can you just quickly come up with like 3 posts for Freedom Day next week or some shit? It's like, have you gone through traffic? Have you gone through like, the right processes and procedures? And I mean, like what you were saying earlier, that for each client that is trying to create this hybrid model of internal and in-house, it's like you have to take it on a case-by-case basis based on the capacities that each party has. So there, fuck around, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah. So anyway, like for me, you look at how, when you're talking about those water cooler briefs, right? And I don't want to name names.
There's only a water cooler brief.
Yeah, exactly.
And you say no, they'll go to the next person because you're 100%. Not agile.
Exactly. And the thing is that their client's ability to feel like they can give you a water cooler brief almost feels like, no, that's the type of relationship I have with you, that we chilled like that, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think to make sure that you don't allow sort of clients to run with that is setting boundaries, right? So for instance, in the beginning, like at some of the other like places I worked, when that happened, I would just be like, okay, cool, I'm here now. Let me just help the client get the work out, whatever. And then somewhere down the line, I realized, no, man, actually, I'll let you finish, and then once you're done, can you email that and put in a brief and send it to traffic and client service, please? Because I have to. Because there has to be a tracking process of this thing. Because it has to be put in the system, allocated resource, put timelines. Because now what happens is that in the water cooler brief, there isn't so much that thing of like, oh, I need this by Wednesday. No? It's just like, oh, can you do this? Yeah, there's no boundaries. There's no outline in terms of how
the emergency comes when you hear that there actually is a deadline.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Which was one of the things that you need.
Upfront.
Oh yes, like I finally remember what I was gonna say. Is that when a client is moving away from the external agency prospect and the model to more in-house, there is that part where they're gonna ask the external agency to teach the internal agency. So there's a level of IP that is going to be dispersed, which you should charge probably through the fucking roof for that. So just to show a client how things are run in an agency. Yeah,
that's probably you preempted my next question. Do you need to have that proactive type of thinking as an agency to say, guys, we've got a short time frame here. This can't be our only client. This is our pipeline, and this is how we're going to manage this in terms of saying, probably got 3 years. We can upsell for the next 6 to 18 months, but we need to understand that this is the timeline.
Yeah, that succession planning should be rolling like all the time, like always getting new clients. You can't just have a client that's got like 70% of your revenue and stuff, because anything can happen after
this economy.
Because also the thing is, for me, when Sia's talking about like, you know, how you get the external agencies to kind of educate and teach the new process internally, and also how do you quantify that IP? Because he set off something with me when he said that, is because I was literally part of that process. At my previous agency, and we were working for one of the major banks, and I got briefed to compile a digital playbook. As in, this was a 180-page document of how you do digital online. Step one, do everything: consumer profiles, consumer insights, research.
That's a textbook.
That's what I was about to say.
You know what I'm saying?
It's a textbook.
You know what I'm saying? And then so when that brief came in, I'm looking at it, I'm like, so we just going to just maniggle away, and then 2 weeks later they say, "Sharp guys, thank you very much.
It's been dope.
It's been dope. We good now, because at the end of the day, like,
love and light.
Exactly. How do you quantify that? Because now you're using that to base an entire model of how you create that in-house agency.
So will that handover process then ever really happen or be complete? Until I think that hybrid of saying that, because the textbook is just that, it's theoretical. You've got so many other things that happen. I was telling my lady that, she's saying to me, "Why are you always studying?" And I'm like, "Do you know that we are owned by Google penalties?" It's you have to know before client what is happening, why did it happen, and how we're going to fix it. That requires you to have continuous learning. So when you've got this textbook that is chilling and fine, it might be the best ever standard operating procedure in the world, then how do you make sure that it's a living, breathing, and evolving document beyond just...
So that's the point, right? So for them, it was a case of, we need to, as much as it's the entire digital ecosystem, you need to simplify this thing to the point that if any random person picks it up, they know how to work at digital, right? So not to say like you have to create it in layman's terms or whatever, but you need to make it so understandable just from reading it that, okay, cool, we only do this, or this, we only do that. So I think it's, it's a difficult process, because what happens is that, you're saying, how do you manage that process in terms of the handover, whatever? And
the understanding, I mean, Sunny, you can literally lecture people.
Yeah, because what tends to happen, right? What tends to happen is that that brand or that client blindsides you. So they didn't tell us up front that, like, oh, guys, okay, so we're trying to move to this in-house model.
What we want you to do, sense.
Whatever. We want you to help us in this process, whatever. They were just like, yeah, it's a digital playbook. And we were like,
as opposed to like
can
a
you
more
turn this brief down, whatever?
Process,
So there was no faith in that thing in terms of, okay, why are we doing this? And then all of a sudden, as soon as we're done, they were like, okay, thanks guys, we appreciate it. And we're like, oh, Ganti, that's why we're doing it. There was none of that conversation of like, actually, this is the purpose of it, etc.
That's the thing.
And I'm sure that there was
resentment.
There was an invoice that was sent out for that playbook, probably separately from everything else. There's probably no line of sight, because I don't think like a digital playbook as to how to run an internal agency is in the SLA. I'm sure it was like a separate cost in itself. Probably. But I also do think in cases like those, it should be more of a continuous process, maybe over a period of like 6 months. You do a handover like that. But to my understanding, I don't think clients cares too much about the specific nuances that happen outside of the cut and dry stuff that we do. So for them, it's just like a box ticking exercise. We got this thing. Anyone that pulls in here should be able to just pick up hit the ground running.
Got you.
No problems. Like, yeah.
So now, is there maybe a synergy that we can see as you're talking about the 6-month process? It's not going to be just one way. There has to be a hybrid in order for the handover to happen effectively over 18 months. Would then smaller agency fit the bigger corporation or brand that maybe lack? So they fill in where they are specializing. So in that way, building that capacity until that brand or agencies, big agencies, able to let go.
And run on its own. But I mean, so with a smaller agency, I think a big corporation,
boutique as they call it,
it'll be a lot easier for a big corp to consume or take over a boutique agency and
is
make
it predatory? That's what I wanted. Is the crux of it.
It's capitalism. That's what it is.
Fair
At the end of
enough,
the day,
yeah.
if you've got the dough,
Yeah.
you can do whatever. You can literally do whatever you want.
Big dick energy, bro.
So if I come through and I say, listen, 5 M's, I want your whole thing. Like,
So then should that be the goal for boutique agencies, to eventually be bought over or to part?
Well, I wouldn't believe that boutique agencies just want to be boutique forever. I think there is a bigger goal in mind. Unless some people just want to reach a certain cap or a resistance level where they're like, okay, we can sell from here.
Certain things aren't made to be scaled, unfortunately, in terms of what you offer. Again, I think Siya mentioned it around capacities as well, and also specialization. So you'll find a lot of like sort of your smaller creative studios are always like, okay, fine, we have 8 to 10 of us here. We want to make sure that we can take on clients that, you know, we can manage and do properly and run the whole process end to end, as opposed to kind of just being a factory shop and just doing everything.
And biting off more than you can chew and having missing deadlines.
We've been talking about these as entities, as if there's no people behind them. What kind of people would you expect to work in boutiques? Is there a person who works well in smaller agencies or in big agencies? And it's almost like the coach who can do really well at a mid-table to bottom club. But when they get to the big boys, it's
Shout out
difficult.
David Moyes.
So is there a way, like, are there people for boutique agencies and other people for corporate and bigger brands? Is there a type of
Personally, I think smaller and boutique agencies are perfect for newcomers into the game, just to get a good idea of the full 360 view of the marketing funnel, the whole process. It also forces them to put on different hats and to work in different departments and just understand the whole concept better. But I mean, once you start gaining your experience, pushing your knowledge, getting more qualifications, you have to. That's the time that you're supposed to start specializing, and the best way to do that is at a bigger agency, where all the processes and procedures are just tailored to make your specialization easier to manage and easier to execute.
Because Sani, I'm sure you're aware that there's a certain way of working when you're at a higher level, and you can't get stuck into the actual implementation, and sometimes there's like no one to do it. How do you manage that delicate balance of moving from boutique, as Siya is saying, and then all of a sudden now managing this huge structure?
So I think it's important that obviously once you move into sort of the bigger agencies, what tends to help that, what you'd assume is that overwhelming, you know, trepidation around kind of like, oh, I'm at the big time, essentially, is those processes and stuff that, you know, the bigger agencies have that the boutique ones don't necessarily need to have. And also, you know, in terms of the smaller sort of boutique agencies, there you have way more creative freedom. So now when you go to like a bigger agency, your creativity is get out of this box, like make a plan. So you get guidelines, you get guardrails in terms of like, okay, you can only do this because of X, Y, and Z and whatever. And you have to find a great idea out of that little corner. So it tests you a lot more in terms of trying to, you know, crack a great creative idea when you work at a bigger agency, because the barriers are a lot more the red tape. Now you must have 6 people reviewing your thing. When you're at a boutique agency, it's just except for and then that's it, right? So you have more responsibility in that sense, and checks and balances. Yeah. So I think understanding that, you know, you're playing. What's that saying? Small fish in a big pond. That kind of feeling happens when you go to a bigger agency. Is that like, oh, okay, cool. Firstly, I'm not the only dope one here. There's like a whole lot of other dope people as well. And I need to accept that and be able to find my way in terms of like, how can I still apply and exert my skill set in the right way that at least can still be seen in this sort of big jungle that I'm in right now. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't think there's specific personalities for each, but I would say, especially when you look at creators, you see that their frustration sort of builds a lot more once they start moving to a corporate environment. Because now they're being told, oh no, that risque thing that you want to put in that ad, you can't do that anymore.
You can't use that copy.
You can't use that copy. You can't use that tone, etc., etc. And it gets quite frustrating. Whereas, you know, at the smaller agencies, you have a little bit more carte blanche to kind of express yourself. So for creatives, I've seen it so many times how difficult it is for them to adjust to that.
Yeah, but I think that's basically our story for the day, and we've looked at the various processes, hoping to find out what your comments are. We do respond on the networks. You can follow, you can subscribe. We are on YouTube, Digital Dyans, across all networks, Twitter, Facebook, and also you can catch us on the Instagram, our profiles there individually as well. Hope to talk to you again. Don't forget, we are looking forward to hearing about who and what you'd like to see on the show. Peace out.
Clear, call me the gas on it goes with my footwear. Got my leg chain and YouTube drip on a daily, you know that I do that. Bitch, I clear, call me the gas on it goes with my footwear. Got my leg chain and YouTube drip on a daily, you know that I do that. Bitch,